Hello there, sword friends. I'm going to do a very brief and quick review on this Hanwei Ronin Katana. Now, it sounds weird when I say that because Ronin Katana is a different manufacturer of katanas with a variety of Ronin Katana products. This is the Hanwei Ronin Katana, or Hanwei 47 Ronin Katana. And while I have it in my hand, I thought I would do a brief review on it. This is actually owned by a friend of mine, and I am selling it on his behalf. And so I can't really do a whole lot of rigmarole or the conventional style review that I do if I even have a conventional style. Anyway, it's going to be very brief and just quick and talky, and I'll try and include some photos and other bits in it, but there's some cool points to note about this sword that maybe you're interested in knowing. So while I have it, I'm going to talk at you. On the CAS Iberia website, it's advertised at $1,500, and if you want to go spend more money, as always, you can go buy it from that website directly, but Cult of Athena sells it for much less money, and you can buy it from Cult of Athena for around $900. Now, do I think it's worth $900? That's the price I'm going to look at. Cult of Athena is kind of the, it's a trusted online retailer that generally tends to be very price focused in terms of value, and they do a good job in terms of customer service. So I'll use them as the example. Not to say you have to buy it from them, you can buy it wherever you want, but $900 from an authorized dealer seems to be the least expensive I've found. Another quick note that I want to throw out about the weight and size and measurements if you compare them to what is advertised. So this particular sword has an 11¼ inch handle that's measured from the very end all the way up to the top of this fuchi right here. That's supposed to be advertised at 11 inch, so they were off by 1/4 inch there. Now the blade itself is supposed to be 28½ inches. I'm measuring from the tip to the top of this habaki here. This is the munmachi area, and that measurement does not include the habaki. They advertise 28 inches, and that's exactly what I came up with. The habaki will add about another inch. And in terms of weight, it comes in at 2 pounds 7 ounces if I measure it with the blade without the saya, which is conventionally how they're measured. So 2 pounds 7 ounces. I got the same exact measurement, and for once I got the same exact measurement from a sword that's the advertised weight is actually what it weighed. One thing that doesn't show up is the sori. It's a 3/4 inch sori, so that's measured if I put this on a table and then put this end on the table and measure the highest point, it is 3/4 inch. That's a measure of the kind of curvature from the inside edge there, or the back of the blade, I should say. Anyway, that's the measurements. They actually came pretty close. The only discrepancy from what was advertised was this little nubbin at the bottom here, and it gained 1/4 inch at 11¼ inches. But overall, it's reasonably close, a lot closer than I see with a lot of manufacturers and their advertisements. They don't necessarily take that too far to heart, because I've measured a lot of Hanwei blades and contrasted them versus what is advertised, and they are not always as accurate as on this. So there's certainly no guarantee that the one that you'll get will be as close. But this one is, and they did a good job on this one. So the first thing that I want to point out is just the overall appearance of the sword. Hopefully more photos are showing up in my post-editing. Basically, to me, this sword looks like what the contemporary idea of a samurai sword is. It's got a black saya, it's got black ito, that's the silk wrap, the saya is the scabbard. It has black fittings, and it just looks like what your stereotypical idea of a samurai sword would be. But if you look a little closer at it, there's a little bit more detail in it than just black with some white samegawa. The fittings themselves, we have some 2 crossed feathers over here, and then the fuchi is this piece here, has some yin-yang style pieces on it, which probably are not coming up terribly well in the camera. The suba, or what would be, hand guard here, has actually some really detailed casting quality to it. Actually, all the fittings do, and that's something that I should note about Hanwei, is that they do generally a really good job with their casting quality. Now, they are cast fittings. Cast fittings, you might wonder what that is. So these are made from a mold, and they're mass-produced, and that's it. Somebody probably made a mold of some kind. I don't know how long that took, but then they're mass-produced. They come out of a mold. And the thing to note about that is that when you do mass production and you make thousands of the same piece, it's really easy to have shitty molds that get, that flub the details, where the edges aren't crisp and it's tough to make out fine details, but you can make out all those details in these fittings. And Hanwei is pretty good about that in general. A lot of their swords have really good cast fittings on them, and that's something that maybe justifies to you the price that you tend to pay, which is a little bit higher than average, because Hanwei is kind of the standard of mass production or reproduction swords out of China. So anyway, what I will say is that the fittings are of good quality, you know, all the way around consistently. It's easy to make out details, and they're pretty interesting. You have to look at them a little closer to see those details because they don't stand out just with a general black theme, but they are there and it's appreciated. There's some pretty cool stuff going on there. The other bit, the Ito itself is actually pretty tight. This is something that isn't always tight. Hanwei usually is consistent about giving you something pretty reasonable, but this one has held up well over the years. It's been in a house in Minnesota, which in Minnesota we have pretty humid summers and we have really dry winters, so that can warp the wood, and it's not uncommon for, you know, Ito to loosen up even if it hasn't been a used sword. But this is still pretty tight, actually. One of the tighter wraps that I've seen on a Hanwei blade. I also like the handle shape. Hanwei gets kind of a bad reputation for having big, honking axe handle-esque kind of SCAs or handles. In comparison, if you take a look, this is the handle from a Hanwei Wind and Thunder, and I don't know if the details between them are showing up or if they look any different on camera, but one feels more axe-like and one feels more refined, and this piece feels quite a bit better in my hand than the other one does. I have no idea if you're able to discern a difference though with my kind of generic webcam looking thing. Anyway, so the shape of the handle is, you know, marginally more refined than what I see in a lot of Hanwei swords. There's also some pretty good Samegawa panels on here. You can see a large Emperor node, which is a sign of a good panel. It is a panel though, so it's not a full wrap of Samegawa, which can be a bit of a downer, but that's also very common. I'd also say that the diamonds are not terribly even. You can see that they kind of bounce around a little bit. Again, not uncharacteristic for a Hanwei piece or any mass production piece, but it's actually a little better than how they normally look. The saya, the scabbard, is a stone-washed looking scabbard. Now, stone-washed, what's the best way to put that? So there's usually a couple different ways that you can have a saya done, a couple different lacquer types. So one is like a gloss lacquer, and if you've heard me talk in my other videos, the really sheeny, glossy stuff tends to show fingerprints really easily. So it's really tough to keep clean if you're anal retentive, which I may or may not be, but after you use it for practice, or even if you just want to put it on display, anytime you touch it, your fingerprints show up and it's really difficult to keep clean. The other style is ishime. Ishime is like a speckled lacquer type stuff, but it has a rough texture to it at times. It can be semi-smooth, but often it has a texture to it, which makes it not show fingerprints as well, but at the same time, if you bleed on it, if you're in your backyard playing Fruit Ninja or something, bleeding on the side may or may not be something that I have done. The ishime stuff can be a little more difficult to clean because it is textured. Little bits of goop can get into those textures and around the spots and make it a little more difficult to clean. It can also kind of chew on the rag that you try to clean it off with a little bit. But this is kind of just a satin or non-gloss stone kind of finish, but it's smooth. It's a completely smooth texture. There's no bumps or ridges or anything like that. It's not like sandpaper or anything. And that's how ishime sometimes can feel. It can be smoother than that. It depends on the ishime that you get, but oftentimes it has a rough texture. This is smooth though, which means it doesn't show fingerprints, and it's probably very easy to clean in either respect, which is kind of nice. The other thing that's nice maybe about a black saya, this one has a ding on it. I'll show you that maybe with a better photo. But you can take Sharpie and fill those in so that it doesn't become as pronounced, which is what was done to this one. Got a little ding on the scabbard and was filled in with Sharpie. The Kojiri, Koiguchi, Kurikata, those are the kind of the horn parts. The mouth, the end of the saya here is made of horn. And they seem actually pretty well done. It has a thinner profile and shape than the other Hanwei blades that I'm kind of used to seeing, and maybe that's because they don't have to lay the lacquer on as thick. I'm not sure, but it's still a big saya, but it feels marginally thinner than some of the other Hanwei pieces that I've held. And seems reasonably well put together. You can see it doesn't come out easily. It has about the right amount of tension. It comes out, but not very easily. It's easy to push out with my thumb. Anyway, so that's the general look. The Sageo seems pretty decent here. Onto the blade. The Habaki looks actually pretty good. Seems really tight on there. Nothing on the sword rattles, nothing wiggles. Again, a very good sign, having been in a home in Minnesota with changing temperatures and humidity levels. It's very easy for a sword to develop a rattle. So the fact that it hasn't is good. Now the shape of the blade, it has a nice kind of pleasant sorry to it. It reminds me a little bit of my bamboo mat, which is probably a little tip heavy for some, but it's actually very easy to maintain tip control. It has a nice comfortable feel in my hand. It feels very, very nimble. I like that it has a wide profile, but not like a giant XL geometry. It's kind of weird. Hanwei makes a few different folded steel blades. This is one of their folded steel lines. It's made out of a folded Swedish powder steel something. Anyway, I'll put some stuff in the description below that maybe outlines more about that. But the Tori is probably my favorite looking sword in terms of the aesthetics and the theme and the colors. But it always comes with this big, wide, thick Hanwei XL grass cutting geometry. And this is a kind of a more classic, big style blade, but it's not just dedicated to cut tatami mats. And the feeling of it is actually really good. I like the look. What you might be able to see here on the camera is that this Hanwei hamon is this frosted hamon, and the nice thing about it is that if you're displaying it or something, it shows up really well in just about any light. Normally I don't look at swords like this, but since my web camera's up here, that's just how it's got to go. Now the thing I don't like is along the flats being kind of this plane of the blade, you can see there's a lot of little ripples, which may or may not be coming through in the camera real well. And the downside of that is that, well, really there isn't a downside other than it's kind of an irksome thing if you're looking for a custom or a nice sword. There are inexpensive swords that do a good job with these planes and make it look well ground, but this one has a little bit of ripples. Now in terms of use, you're probably not going to feel it, you're probably not going to notice it. In terms of historic stuff, yeah, sometimes they would be ripply on Nihonto, and but if you have a really well-made sword or a custom sword, these planes are often just glass smooth, right? If you look down them, you don't see little waves and ripple marks, and that's very common for Hanwei products. It's very common for many mass-produced Chinese blades. And sometimes you get really lucky and there are inexpensive swords at $100 or $200 that don't have it. From a practitioner standpoint, it's not going to really affect you in cutting. It doesn't make the blade less useful. It doesn't make it more prone to breaking. It's just an attention to detail that I think they miss. They do really, really well, better than average on the casting quality of the fittings, but I think they don't do as well at the kind of finish work and polishing for the waviness. Anyway, the other bit I can note about the blade is it's a folded blade. What you're not probably noticing here is a hata. A hata is kind of like the wood grain pattern that you might see if you are, you know, looking at the blade really close. What I can tell you is it's there. It shows up probably best along the hamon. It's a little harder to see in other places along the blade, but it does have a pleasant hata. It's easy enough for me to see, but I think probably very difficult for you to see on camera. It doesn't show up terribly well. It's a little subtle. The other thing I'm going to note, and that you might be able to see in a few spots here, is Hanwei blades tend to rattle in the saya. If I put this back in, what you might be able to hear here is you can hear this kind of tip wiggling around inside the saya. Now what happens, at least my suspicion, we call it saya rub, and as this blade is shipped from China and kind of bouncing around in the saya as it's transported across, you know, the country and across the globe, little fine blemishes in the polish begin to appear. And it seems very common that you spot these on Hanwei blades. I don't know that I've seen too many Hanwei blades with a, you know, completely impeccable polish. And my camera work stuff is not showing up well. Okay. But that is it. It has some blemishes in the polish. This one hasn't been used. Overall, though, I'm really happy with it. I mean, it feels really good in the hand. I like the overall shape. I like the design. I like the attention to detail in the fittings. I think this is a pretty pretty good sword, and that probably brings me to the end point here. Is it worth it? Now, it's really difficult for me to do. I like Hanwei. I think of them as the standard in Japanese katana reproductions out of China, and you pay for that type of reputation. I think that reputation is actually worth something monetarily. I mean, if you think about these being used in the context of a practitioner or to actually cut things, the reputation of that forge is pretty important. When you're chopping stuff, if the blade has a bad heat treatment, it can turn into a helicopter of death and, you know, potentially maim or kill somebody if you're actually using it in a controlled environment even. So the fact that they have reasonably good quality control and that they're known for that is worth something. Now, that said, there are other products that are available that do the same thing and give you differential hardening and a folded blade and some attention to detail, and are also from reputable forges, and they're around the same ballparks. And nothing about this makes me exactly want to lunge out and spend $900, but what I can say to any prospective buyer would be, if you're looking for this sword and something about it tickles your fancy from the way it looks, or maybe the size and how it feels, or maybe you want something that has a general kind of tip-heavy but controllable feeling, I think that this is a solid sword. There's nothing about it that makes me say don't buy it, but there's nothing about it that makes me say it's an awesome value and you should go buy 2 of them now. I hope that that makes some sense. It's not that I would say no, but you know, there has to be something about it for you as a buyer that would make you want it. Because if you're just looking for something with that list of specs, it has to be black with differential hardening and folded steel and something cool on the fittings. You have a lot of choice, and nothing about this one says it should definitely be this one as opposed to pieces from Skydro or Dynasty Forge or maybe some other new forge to hit the market. Anyway, that's what I have for you. I hope it's reasonably helpful, and as always, thanks for watching. And that's kind of difficult for me to answer. Camera lighting, maybe? Okay, yeah. And it has some characteristics that are kind of phenomenal or sort of common for Hanwei. Jesus, I'm going to start over again. Manufacturer that makes a variety of katana-related products. Katana-related fuck! God damn it. Ah, Jesus, I rambled so much. I haven't thought that through very well. I just have to start this whole fucking thing over, don't I? Probably can't really see, but sometimes Ito will move around and...
Papa, can I watch Netflix on your phone?
Recording.
I didn't really
I don't know.